Welcome to episode 2 of the Frazier and Frasier podcast. I'm your host, Adam Frazier, and with me as always is my co-host, Wes Corwin.
How are you? How are you, Internet?
But
also you, I want to make sure you're doing okay.
You know, Wes, my good friend Wes, not my best friend.
No. Well, that's hurtful. I'm not your best. Alright, fine. No, I won't get
Jeff is my best friend.
Oh. That's alright.
He works at the sandwich shop right across the street.
I understand.
He sometimes gives me extra lettuce on my sandwich.
Just because I've never given you extra lettuce on it. I also work at the sandwich shop.
So we have just watched together episode 2 of season 1, episode 2 of Frasier.
Space Quest.
Space Quest.
Space Quest.
Not the space, not like the space where they're in space.
Yes.
Moons.
Because in between episode 1 and 2, we've talked about the extensive overlap between the Frasier universes and the Star Trek universes.
Right.
So I actually, when I saw Space Quest, I was like, is this how fast Frasier runs out of ideas as we move right into? But it's a double meaning. It's not space.
It is Frasier's quest for space.
He would like space. Go ahead.
We start off pretty much right, I think, like the day after the last episode aired.
Very close together.
And it's Frasier waking up.
Frasier's waking up. He's a little cranky.
He doesn't remember who Daphne is.
He has no recollection whatsoever.
He doesn't remember hiring her to take care of his crippled dad.
Daphne has a long monologue about all the things she's doing to set up the house, and at the end of it, he goes, "And you are," and it's very, very Frasier.
So we see his morning routine and how it's getting interrupted by Daphne and his dad. There's still a lot of friction between him and his dad, and Frasier just wants to get on with his morning.
Absolutely, he relies on a structure to his morning. He needs coffee. Yeah. By the way, I looked at you asked because at some point Frasier tries to drink the coffee. It's a Kenya, but that's not how it said the country in the subtitles, but he said Kenya, which is not how you pronounce the country. And then Frasier's like, "What happened to my Kenya coffee?" And from Starbucks. And his dad is like, "Oh, you put an eggshell. You usually put that in the coffee. You put eggshell in the coffee ground so it tastes less bitter." And clearly, Frasier wants a little bitterness in his coffee because he's a bitter, kind of got some bitterness to him. A little subtlety in that writing.
I found it interesting. This is probably the only time I think that, to my recollection at least, that they mentioned Starbucks in a show that takes place in Seattle.
Entirely in Seattle,
where they have loads of Starbucks.
In the 90s. So I feel like, Starbucks is worldwide now, but at the time it was a very Seattle.
No one had ever heard of Starbucks. They were introduced to it through Frasier.
I have not heard of Starbucks until we watched this episode.
You haven't?
I've never been to a Starbucks.
They're terrible. So we move on, and Frasier is in his little recording booth doing a show.
Yes.
He wants to do a show about intrusion. Kind of tying into what the last thing. He wants to talk about intrusion.
He wants to talk about people intruding via intrusion.
So his first caller.
He's a little irritated because he's like, none of you people want to talk about intrusion, and but he says it in a more Frasier kind of subtle way. But he's clearly a little miffed. And somebody calls in and is like, "Hey, I have agoraphobia. I'm afraid of large open spaces."
And your thoughts on intrusion are?
Nothing. And the guy says, Frasier says, just hang out on the phone and I'll connect you with a professional to take care of you. And the person on the phone.
That person was Christopher Lambert.
No.
Sorry. Christopher Reeves.
You were thinking of the Highlander.
I was.
But it's Superman.
Yes.
And isn't it ironic that he can travel at the speed of light, but he's afraid of large open space? Compliment. I think was that the joke?
Maybe it was him as Clark Kent.
Calling
into Frasier to get advice. Just on the off chance that, just to contribute to his cover. Mm-hmm. Not to just want people to know he's Superman.
Yeah. Living in Metropolis.
He calls all the way to Seattle.
He calls all the way into Seattle. And he makes up a fake scenario And so Lois can walk in on him and be disappointed in him as the Clark Kent character. So she's one step away from ever thinking that he's Superman.
Yes.
It's a brilliant sort of gambit that he takes on. He frequently, as Clark Kent, will go through embarrassing scenarios and force themselves through him so that Lois Lane has one less reason to believe he's Superman.
Right.
Yep.
And then we meet Bulldog.
We meet
This is the first episode where
in
we
the
meet
Frasierverse. Never before. This is a big moment. How many times, if you had to estimate in your mind's eye, will Bulldog come up after this point?
Oh, too many.
Too many. Just an excessive.
Not enough. No. No. He's played very well by Dan Butler.
Dan Butler.
Which this is the segment of the show where I get to talk about Star Trek.
Oh, please.
Okay, because Dan Butler was in an episode of Star Trek.
Oh, okay.
He was in an episode of Star Trek Voyager, I believe, where he impersonated. He played an alien who could like change his appearance, but like only between like Dan Butler and like some woman.
Oh, okay.
That he could only change those two people, but then he could change. But then he could swap himself with Tom Paris, who was kind of the navigator on Voyager, and that's all I remember of that episode.
he could pretend to be Dan Butler. He could pretend to be a woman, and he could pretend to be
Tom Paris.
Okay, so he could conceivably be more things, but he only was those three things.
Right. So Bulldog is, kind of a foil to Frasier. He is not an intellectual. He is not, very, he's not very, intelligent. He doesn't express himself well. He's just all about sports and, girls.
Yeah. You know that guy, that young man who told you he wanted to kill people, his family or something? Yeah. You know what I would have said? Sports!
Sports.
He literally, I would have told him, sports! One word, exclamation point at the end.
And then that boy would think, he's like, you've made a real deal. I'm not going to kill my parents anymore.
I'm never going to do it again. Not after this time. Not after this last time.
I'm going to go sign up for something.
Yeah. I'm gonna score every time that I think about hurting my parents. I'm gonna score a touchdown. That's what I'm gonna do.
Yeah.
Thanks, Bulldog.
So Frasier then goes back to the apartment. He's trying to read.
Yeah.
And
he wants to read in the park, and then there's rain. Best laid plans didn't go right. He comes home. It's a beautiful sunny day, but there are rain sound effects.
I think the idea with that is that it started thundering before it started raining. Uh-huh. So he's like, oh, I can go to the park now. I gotta go home because it's gonna start raining any minute. It's Seattle.
It's Seattle. At any point, it could start raining.
So he gets home. He's not wet.
He's not.
Which we noticed.
He's never been wet.
But it's because it's not raining yet. And then later on in the scene, we can hear rain.
But he clearly put his umbrella, which he had back in the thing, but it was also very dry. So
right.
Yeah.
The show's a mess.
This episode 2, and you're already declaring the show a mess?
Just cancel everything.
Cancel the whole project. All right.
So he gets a brief moment where he can, think to himself, and then, Martin and Daphne get home.
Right.
And, they get in a fight. Martin and Frasier get in a fight, as they often do in these. This is still early days for them. They are still at odds with one another. Very conflicting personalities. Frasier has to have everything just the way he likes it.
Very specific.
Martin is completely.
He's not like a free spirit. He's an angry man. He just butts
he's an angry man with a bullet in his head.
Yes. They're both very angry. But he seems to get along well with Daphne. And she says the end of a joke. And you asked, and I tweeted.
Right. When they walk in, Daphne is saying, what was the line?
And the elephant says, he's with me.
So that was the end of the joke. This is a classic sitcom setup where you hear the character tell the end of the joke,
right,
but you don't actually hear the beginning of the joke.
It must have been so funny because the other character laughed so hard at the joke. But I'll never know. And I found the joke.
So what is the joke was? You're a comedian. Tell us.
Okay. A couple and an elephant walk into a bar. a couple, and an elephant. The lady orders herself a drink and then goes to the ladies' room to powder her nose. As the bartender pours her drink, he turns to the man in the couple and, barely keeping himself from laughing, says, "Anything for the gentleman with the huge trunk?" And the elephant says, "He's with me." It's about penises.
This is a classy show.
This is a classy show.
Yes.
Yeah.
So Martin and Frasier have their little spat.
Yes.
Frasier retreats to Cafe Nervosa.
Yes.
His sanctuary.
The only place that he could be. And then Niles comes in.
Yeah. Niles comes in. He's got to ruin everything.
Niles, that old Niles.
He comes in speaking Italian.
He comes in ordering in Italian.
Yeah.
And thanking the cafe in
Italian.
Yeah. Did he order it? What did he order?
He ordered a cafe latte.
A cafe latte. Yeah. What was special about the order? He says.
I think he just literally orders a cafe latte in. Cafe latte, please, is all he says.
Is that what it is?
Yes.
That's all it is?
Yes.
All right.
And then he says, "Many thanks."
Many thanks. Please. Yep. All right. I thought it was doing something. Okay. I guess it was just teaching me a little bit of Italian. That's fun. All right.
So they discuss the fight that Frasier and Martin just had.
Sure.
Frasier is contemplating, we learn, just paying for a place for Martin and Daphne to live on their own. So he has his apartment to himself, and they aren't in his way. They're not crowding his space.
When you
The
pitched
Space Quest.
When you pitched me, hey, let's record a podcast about Frasier, I was afraid that the show I wouldn't be able to relate to the show. And when I hear a wealthy-ish radio host that is also a famed psychologist presented with a problem, I'm going to have to buy another apartment for my dad and his live-in nurse. I'm so glad I can relate to these things.
Well, you have to keep in mind, I think they're still using some of Maris's money.
Oh, okay, good.
So there is some, realism.
Niles and Maris are chipping in. I see.
Maris is loaded.
She is independently wealthy. She's an heiress. Well, hold on. If you're an heiress, have you heired? What do you inherit as an heir? You inherit the money.
Well, you still have access, I think.
You have an amount of access to the money.
I mean, Paris Hilton.
True, but yeah.
I don't know if she had her own money or if she
is Maris.
They have to make this simple life somehow.
Is Maris a reference to Paris?
I'm pretty sure Maris
predated Paris.
Paris.
I see. Do you think Maris influenced? Do you think the Hiltons named Paris, having misheard the name of Frasier's character?
I think that's exactly what happened.
There we go.
I think we cracked the case.
We're figuring things out on this podcast.
So Niles points out the obvious flaw in Frasier's plan, which is the entire reason Frasier wanted Martin to move in with them in the first place was so they could get closer. They were never very close when Frasier and Niles were growing up. So Frasier wants to form this bond with his dad in this new life that he has in Seattle.
And does that sort of kind of retcon the first episode where Frasier took his dad in so he didn't have to be in a home? Is that... it's a slight motivation change.
I mean, I don't think that they ever really wanted to put him up in a home.
No.
I think that was probably Maris's idea.
That was probably Maris's idea.
That
Maris hanging out with Pickle Richie,
Yes.
the other one.
Right.
Yep. I'll never forget. Yep. Maris. You go.
So Niles, of course, is like, oh, well, so you want to have a relationship with Martin,
but you don't
actually want to be around him.
Yeah. Yes.
So of course this is an obvious flaw.
Right.
Frasier bows to Niles' wisdom and says he's a good brother and a credit to the psychiatric community.
And then Niles says, "You're a good brother too."
Laugh.
Lengthy meet. Lengthy.
And that is a joke worthy of a scene change.
Yeah, I feel that. And then an interesting choice to name the next scene and the final scene that isn't the credits in the episode. A couple of white guys sitting around talking.
I mean, that's a pretty accurate description of the scene.
Accurate, and I guess it's somewhat woke of Frasier to call out the race of the character. Yeah, it's good. I mean, it'd be interesting.
There are a lot of white people in the show, Wes.
There have been a lot of white. Look, Maggie has seen every episode of Friends, which means I have seen most of Friends. I didn't want to, and I still don't want to have seen any of Friends.
As you should.
But a lot of white people. This show has a comparable amount of white people, which is crazy because it doesn't have 6 main characters like Friends has, and still about the same number of white people.
Yep, it's you know what? That is a topic I feel for a future episode. Oh God. Oh.
I mean, I assume Michael Dorn shows up.
As it would be great. I would love it if Michael Dorn showed up.
Or LeVar Burton. Also, there's so much overlap in the Star Wars, Star Trek. Excuse me. I'm sorry.
And those are like some of the only 2 actors that never appear in this entire show.
Well, that's interesting, isn't it? Well, now I feel bad for calling that out.
Yeah. So, where are we?
Whoopi Goldberg.
Whoopi Goldberg would have been perfect.
She's also not in the show.
She's also not.
That's almost all of them. Shoot.
We'll get into this. We'll get into this.
George Takei.
Oh God, that would be good.
God dang it! This really is okay. I was hoping.
Not a lot of classic Star Trek actors, as far as I can.
I understand.
They were more interested in getting the people who were working on Star Trek when the show was being produced.
Of course.
It was easier to get them.
Of course.
So. Where are we?
We're at the beginning of a couple of white guys sitting around talking.
Right. So Frasier decides, he's going to try and take Niles' advice. He's going to try and get along with his dad. And he comes up with this solution. We're going to have a civilized conversation for 3 minutes?
3 minutes.
3 minutes.
He takes out an egg timer and he puts it to 3 minutes. And they're going to try to have a civilized conversation without yelling at each other for 3 minutes. And he starts the timer, and the first thing Martin says is, "This is the stupidest thing!" And he stops it, and he says, 1 second, we can't beat 1 second. And then he says, let's try to beat our record, and puts it back to 3 minutes, and starts the timer again.
So Frasier thinks it would be a good idea for them to share something vulnerable about themselves.
Yes.
As a way of, opening up to one another,
right.
Which is really what Frasier wants. He wants to have a moment with his dad.
They don't want small talk, no sports, no opera. Keep it all off the just real stuff.
So Frasier tells his father about how, I guess, in the months leading up to episode 1,
right?
Before he moved back to
the Cheers verse.
I don't think this was an episode of Cheers, though. I don't think this actually happened on screen.
Yes, because they were together at the end of Cheers and from Frasier
and in Wings.
Yes. In Wings?
They were together in Wings.
Oh. What do you think the timeline is between Cheers, Wings, I mean, it must have happened.
Well, they say in the first episode, it was 6 months.
6 months.
From when it's been 6 months since he moved from Boston to Seattle. But that doesn't mean that it's been 6 months since the last episode of Cheers aired.
Yeah.
Or that one episode of Wings aired.
Right.
All we know is that in the months leading up to Frasier deciding he's going to move back to Seattle, he's so distraught over his marriage with Lilith that he contemplates suicide.
Right.
He gets out on a ledge. He's going to jump, and he thinks about his son, Freddie.
Thinks about poor Frederick.
And that's, I guess, what gives him the will to live.
Yes.
So he gets down off the ledge.
His son, who hates sports as much as he does, as we've established in episode 1. But he plays hockey. That was episode 1.
I think it was field hockey, wasn't it?
It was field hockey, which is a form of hockey.
Right. To which Martin replied, his reaction to this story
is one time I was in the garage. This was a couple months.
Well, so his reaction is
So you didn't jump.
You didn't jump, huh?
And Frasier's like, yeah, good. You kept up with the story. Great. So then Martin reveals, in an attempt to be vulnerable back to his son, a couple months before they moved in together, he was in the attic, and there was something in his eye that was bothering him, and he found that he could turn his eye inside out, quote unquote, like them kids at camp. And
what kind of camps did Martin go to?
That's the island camp.
Okay.
You can go there, and they'll teach you to. If you go to island camp, they'll teach you, hey, you can turn your eye inside out, and then you realize that the doors to the bus are locked.
And your parents' $40.
It's just gone. It's absolutely never coming back.
So, of course, Frasier, that's not the kind of vulnerability he's talking about.
Of course not. He would like to actually have like a moment with his dad, so he calls it out.
And they get into another fight. They get into another argument. Martin's calling Frasier an egghead.
Twice.
Twice.
Calls him an egghead twice.
And it just ends because the timer goes off.
Yeah, and he goes to watch his program.
Right.
And Frasier confronts Martin and says, maybe you should, and then, he doesn't. He's like, I don't know how to say this, Dad, it's going to be difficult to say. And then Martin says, I know, you want to put me in a different apartment, and then I'll live in my space, and you live in your space, and we'll live separately. And Frasier's like, I guess that was easy to say. Laugh, because he didn't have to say it. And then Martin's like, except one problem, I won't. I'm not moving, because it takes...
You're stuck with me.
You're stuck with me. Squatters' rights. I'm never leaving. You'll pry this home from my cold, dead hands.
And of course, he reiterates what Niles was saying is, you can't form a real strong, son-father bond in a couple days.
No.
That kind of thing takes years. Years.
Yep. And he's like, it'll go by before you know it. And then Frasier says, or it'll feel like an eternity.
Or 11 seasons.
11 seasons of Frasier.
And they decide they're going to try it, and that's how it ends. They're still filling out their relationship. They're still trying to get a handle on one another.
Yes.
And it's not going to be something. It's something that we, the audience, are going to get to see. I'm excited about it. I'm excited for you.
I'm excited. Here's the thing. I'm very excited to be exposed to more and more of the Frasierverse. I had a moment, and I was very excited when we watched the first episode, and Frasier said a line about how he had been cut off by Chopper Dave. And then you were like, Chopper Dave comes up later. And I was like, wah! And then he derisively brings up Bulldog in the bullpen. And you were like, this is the first episode with Bulldog. And then, at some point, Daphne says, oh, hey, someone helping me move in. It is, the character's name is Kyle. Kyle, the peculiar... First of all, calling anybody off-screen a peculiar little man and not revealing them only builds suspense and mystery. First of all, he's peculiar, he's little, and you have to look at him to figure out which eye is looking at you. And they're multicolored, because Frasier says the brown one, implying that the other one could be anything. But you would know this one is brown, this one is not. And I was like, I can't wait to meet Kyle.
It paints a very vivid picture.
I can't
But
wait.
you should know this, Wes, that, the more ridiculous the description of the person is, the less likely it is we're actually going to meet them.
Yes. And I should have been aware of it. I mean, you can paint any...
It was just a joke.
It was a bit. It was a goof, and the goof was on me. And I've been played for a fool.
That said, there is a character that we will be introduced to. I think they show up one or two times. They are sort of the building lackey, I think. They just kind of do stuff around. They haul furniture around.
I see.
We will meet them. It's not Kyle, but...
It's not Kyle.
We'll just call him not Kyle.
None of them are Kyle.
So Wes, what were your thoughts on this? I mean, general impressions. Like, how would you? We've seen 2 episodes of Frasier so far. How would you rank them?
From beginning, I would.
From best to worst.
From best to worst.
2 being
Ranking the
best.
Ranking the first
and
two,
one
being the worst. I see.
Not the other way around.
Not the other way around. Not where number 1 is good, number 1 is bad.
Right.
And number 2 is the best.
We're flipping the script.
We're flipping the script. I would rate. But here's the thing. How do you choose between your children? I would rate both of them firmly at 1.5.
Do you have a particular joke that you liked?
Tied for best. Both episodes are the greatest episodes I've ever seen of any television show.
Of Frasier.
The
best episodes of Frasier I've ever seen.
Of all the Frasier episodes, 1 and 2 have been the best I've ever seen.
Was there a particular joke you liked?
Best joke. Best joke that I liked. I really enjoyed the first bit in the first episode. In the second episode, there was a bit. I really liked the Niles. I liked the banter between Niles and Frasier. I really liked the delivery on the "you're a credit to the," and he's like, "Oh, and you're a good brother too," with the lengthy pause. I like a lot of Niles. Niles is pretty great.
I really liked the bit where they've got the egg timer. Martin and Frasier are doing their little. They're having their argument. And it's getting really heated, and just when you think Martin's going to say something that he's going to regret, ding, timer goes off. He's just completely switches modes. He's going to go watch this television show. Yeah. I thought John Mahoney did a fantastic job delivering that.
Fantastic. I remembered one thing. So they set it up, and this is one of those things where when you can set up a joke a little bit in the beginning for a little, and then when you reference it later with different stakes, the laughter increases. So at some point, like Frasier's
there's a lot of that in like these early seasons.
Frasier's walking around with his robe a little bit old. It's the morning. He's a little groggy. He's a little sleepy, and he's walking around. And Martin says to him, "Hey, close your barn door. We got
a lady in the house. This is classy.
Yeah,
we got a classy lady in the house."
He's still wearing the robe. He's got this banter with Daphne, explaining about how important his morning routine is. And then she looks down at his boxer shorts and says, "Oh, look, 6 more weeks of winter," and then cuts out. And I thought that was a very good joke.
Another penis joke.
A second penis joke mentioned on the podcast, but by no means the second penis joke in the first 2 episodes of Frasier. If anything, not even in the front half of the number of penis jokes I've seen on Frasier so far.
Well, Wes, this has been delightful.
This has been great.
I feel like this has gone well, and we're gonna keep doing these. We've got the next episode coming out.
Episode 3.
Episode 3. What's the name?
What's the name?
What's the name
of the episode? That wasn't the name of the episode. Episode 3 of Frasier. We didn't have it ready. Do we have?
No, we did.
Do we have a cue card?
I decided to go into this completely.
Do we have a producer? Dinner at 8.
Dinner at 8 is the episode?
Dinner at 8. Martin turns the tables on Frasier and Niles when they decide to take him to a dinner at a fancy restaurant. Afterwards, Niles meets Daphne for the first time. And I imagine that is very fun.
So in the next episode, we are going to see the first meeting of Niles and Daphne. And that's definitely going to be interesting.
Love it.
All right. Well, thank you so much for joining us. Once again, my name is Adam Frazier. I've been joined by Wes Corwin.
Thank you so much.
This has been the Frazier on Frasier podcast. Thank you for listening, and have a wonderful rest of your day.